Thank you very much, Maria. And I hope, sir, that this is an appropriate moment for all of us at Temenos to say thank you for your support over the years. And in particular, the parents of dear Maria, who have carried on Kathleen's vision so well, so efficiently. For myself, I have known Your Royal Highness for the last 30 years and had a great deal of pleasure in being allowed to send many correspondences to you, which have been extracts from the wisdom of mankind. But I think the most important thing that one should remember is maybe what Kathleen Raine had to say about education. Kathleen said it takes up to 4 years to have a university education, but it takes a whole lifetime to forget it. Very hard words and harsh words, but it's a very good reminder that our education system is in bad need of overhauling. And as Kathleen herself constantly reminded us, that we need to get back to enacting wisdom, not reading about it, but actually embodying the wisdom that we learn from these different traditions. For myself, I would just like to go back to some very basic principles which I have spent so much of my life on. I've never been quite clever enough to be a geometer. And I mean that sincerely, because to be a geometer is a very particular mathematical discipline. I've decided the best thing to call myself is a pattern seeker, somebody who's been seeking after patterns. And on this basis of seeking, I would like to reaffirm the words of Plato in the beginning of the Timaeus. He talks about sight leaving the eye as light, and I would like that to be qualified by the light itself is attention. We seek with our vision. We go out looking. And that intention, that need to find things and to see things is that light that Plato was talking about leaving the eye. William Blake also said something extremely important about the eye, because William Blake was right in the middle of the beginnings of the scientific, so-called scientific revolution, where everything had to be explained by reason. And William Blake said, I don't see with my eye, I see through my eye. And I think that's something which really deserves constant and careful thinking about. Today, I am going to offer some of my work that I have done, which is based on geometry. And the reason I do that is because I'm very, very affected by reading in Plato's major work that Socrates pronounced geometry to be the art of the ever true. The art of the ever true. Now, where can human beings look to find the ever true? Normally, in religions and philosophies, and even then, often with great effort. So geometry being pronounced by Socrates, and Socrates wasn't used to pronouncing things. Socrates was rather more in the mood of questioning, what is justice, he used to say, and so forth, in his dialogues in the Platonic works. And so for him to say quite precisely that geometry is the art of the ever true was very much a reflection of how Plato used geometry to disguise very important philosophical and, if you like, religious truths. A circle will always be a circle, and a straight line will always be a straight line. Now, whether that straight line comes from heaven and comes to earth, or starts at the earth and makes an horizon, the two basically different straight lines, one is horizontal and one is vertical, they both imply both divisions and unity of heaven and earth. So, as far as I'm concerned, one can very easily lose the significance and importance of geometry if one decides to put your geometry through a machine. I'm delighted that Jeremy Nadler has just recently released a major work called In the Shadow of the Machine, and he is demonstrating over quite a long period how the computer has been embraced and taken over by human beings and how dangerous that has become. But as far as I'm concerned, traditional geometry is done by the human hand, attached to the human heart, and applied to a surface of some kind, usually a flat surface. Euclid himself did not give any instructions as to what you needed to practice geometry and what tools you needed, or anything like that. So I have realized that it's best to categorize geometry at 4 different basic levels. The first and the bottom level is ownership geometry. The word geometry itself, geometry or geometry, means to measure the earth. If you measure the earth because you're trying to establish ownership, which is usually what people have as the deeds to their house, they're lines on Mother Earth and they're based on legal ownership. That's the lowest level of geometry, and it's the level where so much conflict comes from, sadly, not least of which in the boundaries between different nations. After ownership geometry comes intellectual geometry. I'm calling Euclid's major work intellectual geometry. It is not attached to the sensorial world. It is basically an exercise in order and logic and proof, whatever we consider proof to be. Now, one thing that Euclid did avoid, although he himself was a Platonist, he avoided touching on the geometry which should be called, and I believe John Michel did a great job in trying to reinstate the information that there is a thing called philosophical geometry. Philosophical geometry meaning, what is the meaning of an equilateral triangle? What is the meaning of a circle? A circle is beautifully, philosophically described as being the all and the nothing. The all and the nothing. In other words, it can only be fully embraced by the paradox. Philosophical geometry allows one to enter into the inner realms of one's own soul and discover one's relationship to not only the world around one, but also the world as a whole. Now, after philosophical geometry, this is very important, there is a fourth level which is very rare, and that is the level of sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is actually ultimately sacred and sacred to the ultimate creator themselves. That sacred geometry is practiced by the Navajo North American Indian people. It is also practiced by the Tibetan people. The Tibetans do a thing called the color chakra, mandala. The word mandala has been, again, sadly, almost abused by modern psychology and trying to turn it into some sort of game that the mind will play, particularly if a therapist asks them to play it. Mandala means seeing the whole universe at once. An extraordinary experience if one can get oneself into that state of mind. Mandala means seeing the whole universe at once. That is what lies behind the reason that the Tibetan Buddhists make their color chakra mandala, and it's also the reason behind which the Navajo Indians produce both of them work in colored sand, by the way, colored minerals or colored sand. And both of these particularly important sacred images, both of them are dissolved after they have been completed. So it's in the completion, in the calling down of spirit. And for the people who make these things, both the Navajo and the Tibetans, they are able to recognize and call down the spirit to be present in the image that they've made. I would just like to return, sir, to our first meeting, which was in the grounds of Kensington Palace, many, many years ago now. I can't remember how long ago. But I was asked to come and see you and bring my architectural drawings that I had already done, and which I did in a portfolio, and we sat and we chatted. And what struck me more than anything else was that I think that we got onto a level of conversation which is unusual, and I'm very grateful for it. I remember you asking me about why people smoked cigarettes. And I said, well, I had thought about that a lot myself, sir. And my own thoughts were the smoking of the cigarette wasn't anywhere near as important as the striking of the light to light the cigarette. And I said, the reason being that we're almost bereft of looking at flame, looking at light, looking at fire. We no longer have that available to us, very rare indeed. And while we're talking about flame, it's a very good reminder that it's fundamental to each program that's put on by Temenos that a candle is lit at the desk or the table where the program is going to be unfolded. This is Kathleen's idea, and it's a beautiful way of bringing the spirit into the presence of the moment that we are working. It is very important today, particularly today, because if you ask almost any student who's taking their A-levels at the moment, if they did geometry as part of their A-levels, they'll usually say yes, and then you say to them, how much drawing did you do? And they look blank. Geometry does not demand anything being drawn. Now, the tragedy is geometry lies at the root of the whole of manifestation. Whatever you call creation, creation is the beginning of manifestation, whether you want to call it a big bang or anything like that, it doesn't matter. But right from the very beginning, geometry had to be established for there to be being. Geometry, one very good example of that is to say this spiral that you see here is known as the DNA helix. Every single living cell of our bodies or any other life on the planet, whether it's a piece of lettuce or anything, is structured inside each cell on this atomic pattern based on carbon, and it makes this magnificent spiral, not unlike the way the planets spiral around the sun and so forth. But everything in our universe that we can possibly turn our attention to is based on geometry, or the order of space. The biggest tragedy of nature is everything is revealed to us, but we can't see it, because we're told, and our education usually seals it up, we're told to look for something else. We're told to look at it as something different from what it is. But one of the most beautiful things is that when you have things revealed to you, it has an overwhelming effect on your inner being. You suddenly see how a flower works, or how a plant works, or how even an animal works. It's rather like William Blake saying, I don't see with my eye, I see through my eye. What is it it's getting through to? It's getting through to your soul. And your soul is the most important part of yourself. Your body is merely an expression of your soul, important as it is. And the soul in itself is only an expression of the spirit which you came into this world with. It's all very mysterious when it comes to it, and modern scientific explanations don't touch anywhere near the reality of the whole of what existence is about. I was very fortunate when I was younger to have made friends with a very important man called Martin Lings, who at the time was working in the British Museum. And he wrote a brilliant book. And in that brilliant book, there was a line which I shall never forget. And it was about symbols. What are symbols? And he said, the greatest loss to 20th century mankind is the loss of a symbolic sense. What do things mean? What do things really mean? Not what they mean in an immediate conversation about you and me and they and the others, but what does a symbol mean? It takes you much deeper into what existence is about. One of the, what I might call even disastrous moves that have been made in modern times has been the way in which we have shed tradition. Now, not all that many people know what the word tradition actually means, or even use it properly if they do use it. Tradition is absolutely essential if we want to bring with us the whole history of our own cultural nature. It doesn't matter, it can be religious, it can be whatever, but once you give up tradition, then you're giving up your access to your own soul. Now, what I'd like to do is just to hold in my hand here a geometry set. This geometry set costs less than £5, and in it there are 10 instruments for making geometry, a little compass and 2 very important triangles. The 2 triangles which Plato named as being the basis of creation itself, the right-angle triangle and the 60-30-90 triangle. But this little package of less than £5 worth can buy at a supermarket. How much do you pay for a computer? Why do people need to put geometry onto a computer? They are completely removing themselves from the act of doing. The act of doing in the Hindu faith is called karma marga or karma yoga. Karma yoga means that you are developing your spiritual nature through the actions of what you do. And through the actions of what you do, when it's geometry, is of vital value, because as Socrates, the reminder of what Socrates said was, geometry is the art of the ever true. That cannot be put in any other way. Now, I'm very fortunate to be in the orbit of Daniel Doherty, and he's lent me this magnificent compass. And I just want to draw attention closely to the fact this compass has a circle at its apex. This is a symbol of divinity itself. This is the ray of creation coming down, a static ray of creation, and this is the movement of love and lack of love for the center in this movement. So this compass is still a traditional compass, and you get hold of it. Where you get hold of it is your responsibility, taking hold of divinity itself. Now, this new dear little compass that I bought with this set does not have a final sphere or circle at its apex. It has a little leg. In other words, a duality instead of a unity. Now, the profound difference between a unity and a duality, which Jeremy Nadler puts together brilliantly in his book about the development of computers. Computers work on yes and no. There's no such thing as yes and no in the human soul. There's yes, no, and maybe. And it's the maybe which is usually the most profound. It's the paradox between two extremes. Aristotle did us a great disfavor by drawing up a series of what he called opposites. Opposition, whether you want to take it politically in Parliament or anywhere else, opposition is always destructive. But the triad, the basis of a triangle, which we'll talk about in a minute, the triad insists that you have two extremes, but you can only have two extremes if you have a third paradoxical position to make up the triangle, and that is the one which embraces both. Both extremes are embraced by being. Whilst one's talking about language and communication, the one major difference between ourselves and the animal world is that we have language and we are able to talk to each other and to write to each other. I wanted to show, we were talking about geometry. This is directly from heaven to earth, single line, as is the Aleph in the Islamic tradition. The Aleph, Ibn Muqla showed how the first dot at the top, before the Aleph comes down, could be proportioned into 7 intervals. And of course, the 7th is profoundly important in the whole universe. Because naked eye, we can only see 7 light objects moving in the heavens. I analyzed the 7 into proportional ratios from Plato and found that all the important rectangles which occur in the Timaeus of Plato can be proportioned exactly into 3 decimal places. The other thing that I'd like to do is to bring in another image from Japan by a Zen artist, and this statement here is a statement of divine. In other words, from heaven to earth, this is the divine dimension. Horizontality is the division between heaven and earth. Verticality is between heaven and earth. Now, how can you possibly learn that from a computer? Said he rudely. What I'd like now is to show this image. Just a matter of interest, how many shapes do you see there? Most often people say it's one circle and another circle, therefore there's 2 circles. Well, of course that's true, but there are 3 shapes there. And there's where the Trinity is automatically present. You cannot have duality by itself. So with the 1 moving over this far, we have this shape here, and that shape is the basis of Euclid's book on geometry. Euclid's book on geometry is the first proposition to find an equilateral triangle is by putting 2 circles. So the center of this circle and the center of that circle are on the peripheries. And this is the image we have at the front entrance to Chartres Cathedral. This is Christ sitting within exactly this shape. Now, I would propose that that was a very good image of his subtle body. And subtle bodies are not things we talk about too much in the Christian world and not in the modern world hardly at all. But for the Vedic world and the Buddhist world, the subtle body is a greatly important reality. So what I'd like to do is just complete that. As I say, this is the first proposition of Euclid. Euclid, the oldest and most venerated geometry book. And the purpose of it is to show how the equilateral triangle can be constructed inside that shape. And here is the equilateral triangle, which is profoundly important, and it's known philosophically as the triad. What Euclid did not do, Euclid did not put in the triangle which can be found in the lower half. I think I'll put that in a different color. This triad in here. And because Euclid was avoiding explaining the philosophy of his work, this is the triangle of aspiration. And this is the triangle, I'm going to call it the triangle of blessing. This is what comes down from God, and this is what our efforts to reach God. Just to reiterate about the geometry here, there are 3 shapes involved, and they embody one triangle that Euclid gave, and I'm going to say, philosophically speaking, that is one stage higher than the intellectual geometry, is this is the triangle of aspiration, where you have a duality below and unification above. This is the triangle of blessing, which came down from heaven to mankind, and this is not put in by Euclid, but this one is the blessing descending and aspiration ascending. What we can do here, we can call that minus and call that plus, and here we have the basis of opposition. Now these two can be considered, as Aristotle did, to be opposite. Plus and minus are not opposite. There's a third position up here, and I'm going to call it P for paradox. The paradox reconciles the plus and the minus. You could put N for neutral if you wanted to, if you were dealing with electricity, but in this particular case, 2 things appear to be opposite, but there is a paradoxical unification. This can be considered to be the divine unity which proceeds down this direction. This is called the proceeding of spirit. This is called the sustaining of spirit, and this is called the returning of spirit back to the divine unity. That's the threefold process that spirit goes through. That is what sustains creation. This is what causes creation. This is the return of creation back to its divine source. I would like to wind up this all too brief discussion about geometry, but with an acknowledgement again of Temenos and the founders of Temenos, the major founder, of course, being Kathleen Raine. And there are only 2 of us left who are still alive. It is Brian Keeble and myself. I would like to read 2 poems to complete this afternoon's work. This is called Flower by Brian Keeble. Naming you here, I give your life, to sound, to revere the silence that year after year from ancient dust your presence makes clear, so words may awaken what song holds dear. You mirror the light I must make shine in song, true sight, granting to each bloom its birthright. Each word spoken, emerging bright, resplendent, stark, like a sun at night. That's by Brian Keeble, called Flower. And now my favorite poem by Kathleen, which I consider to be as profound as any piece of poetry which was ever written by anybody. It's called The World. It burns in the void. Nothing upholds it, still it travels. Traveling the void, upheld by burning, nothing is still. Burning it travels, the void upholds it, still it is nothing. Nothing it travels, a burning void, upheld by stillness. That is from Kathleen Raine's collected poems. Just to return to the special significance of this occasion, I would like very much to thank the Prince of Wales for his continued and unending support to our cause and to Temenos as an institution. Thank you very much, Prince of Wales. Happy 70th.
Bring me